I will bring this meeting of the village trustees of the Morrisville Water and Light and Village of Morrisville to order at 5:30 p.m. Are there any agenda adjustments?
Not for us.
Okay, public comment. Soon we're gonna wait for Tyler and
No, he's for an agenda item.
use an agenda. Okay, are there any public comments? Okay, then we will move on to the approval of the minutes of our last meeting.
I'll make a motion to approve the meetings from the last meeting.
Second.
Motion been made and seconded to approve the minutes of the last meeting as printed. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Have it. Check register. Do I have a motion to approve the check register?
So moved.
Motion been made
I'll second it.
and seconded to approve the check register as printed. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor of approving the check register as printed, please signify by saying aye.
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 The ayes have it. LCPC land use map acceptance.
Didn't know after last time if you were inclined to accept the map or not accept the map. It's here in case you want to take action. But they're looking for people to accept them. It's not approve them, but just accept it. It was good for you.
Well, the first time she was here, I asked her about, the elevations.
Yeah.
And there's a house that's 80 feet above the river that she's got in the, it's not the flood zone, it's the, river. Which is ridiculous. It's High Street. That's why they call it High Street. The next time she came back, she had a little footnote on the page saying these are not to be used for these will not be used for regulatory
Correct.
functions, so the thing is pretty much meaningless then, but so I guess I'll make a motion to approve it.
Oh, second.
Motion been made and seconded
So just know the term of art is accept.
to accept,
That's friendly. Just
Okay.
So we get it correct.
to accept the land use map. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, I will call the vote. All those in favor of accepting the LCPC land use map as presented signify by saying aye.
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 The ayes have it. Other business. Draft of the zoning bylaws review.
Do you want to wait for Etienne for? a
I
minute,
called
or you
him,
wanna just go?
we can go and I
So why don't
give him a call and.
why don't we wait for?
Etienne told me he was gonna be here.
Etienne.
He's the chair of the planning commission. Etienne.
And why don't you just, I don't know if they all know who you are.
Yeah, no, it's not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. So, those of you who haven't met me before, I'm Tyler Nature. I'm the zoning administrator for the town of Morristown and Morrisville. So, my apologies for not being able to get here sooner. We had a pretty busy summer. As you can imagine, I took over the position in May and kind of have had quite a bit to kind of sort through. We're starting to get in front of things a little bit more, so it's my hope to try and come in here on a little bit more of a regular basis. What I wanted to do tonight was to go over the proposed, well, it's gonna be 2026 at this point by the time it would get adopted. Morristown, Morrisville zoning subdivision bylaws. So to that effect, I prepared a memo tonight. This document, has been going on for, work on this document's been going on for a number of years. I believe it started back in 2024 and has been ongoing. With Todd's departure, Todd left, we had some consultants and other people working on this, and I came in. My first day on the job was actually the day that the planning commission had their public hearing on this document and voted it and sent it to the select board, and subsequently didn't pass, so I've kind of been working on it since then. So I'm just gonna kind of steer you a little bit, I'm gonna use the memo kind of as a guide to walk you through the changes here. Due to the amount of changes that did, I tried to do like more of a red line version for you guys, and it just, I think it proved to be more confusing than confusing than helpful.
Well, you know, that's the way we've done it the last 5 years I've been here.
Yeah,
They have the new section in yellow, the section going out in red,
yeah,
because I don't know what everybody else is gonna be doing, but you know, you got 72 pages here.
Yep.
Gotta compare it to the old one.
yeah, so
Okay, we're gonna be reading 150 pages and going back and forth and back and forth. And I know the last time I did this, it took like a week.
no, and it's, again, the document that I had a lot of, because so many people had edited it, it just wasn't. I have a hard time following the red line myself. So what I did bring one red line copy, so somebody did want it, but what I figured I would do is I'd prepare the memo and just walk you through the changes. There's certain sections that are more cosmetic changes than substantive, and then I wanted to focus on
If
the
you
substantive.
want one red line, if you did bring one, we talked about making sure you brought at least one. However many of you want a red line version, that can end up with me, we can get.
Yeah, I could send them a PDF of
Copies
copies.
or whatever you all want, it just, I knew you were gonna want one, Bob, so.
Well,
We can make copies.
you know, this is nothing like we've done before.
No, I
You know,
understand.
you sat down with the select board, everybody had been over this thing multiple times, we sat down. And we talked about what we're gonna do.
This is intending to be the first step in the process, Pat, just so you know, it's not the
Okay.
end.
So. So just,
But I did, knowing that this was the first step and that we're starting up, I did suggest to Tyler that he try to like synthesize the key points in the memo for you, so at least you get the big stuff, and then I know you wanna see all the red lines and all that, so to figure, let's hit the big stuff that's changing in a first gathering, particularly since you didn't have an advance to dive through it.
Yeah.
That makes sense to you.
so, and just the preference of this, really the purpose is, again, is just to kind of give you the, the 30,000 foot level view of this document, and say what were the big changes kind of between 2023 and 2024. I also have a copy of 2023 here right now, so if anybody has any questions about what specifically is in 2023, we can absolutely go over that. And just a little disclaimer, about this, there is a general, some general changes that were done to the document in terms of like formatting. The numbering and stuff was kind of all over the place, so one of the things I tried to do, is go back in and change that a little bit, so I note in here, instead of doing like section 100, like 100.1, 100.2. It goes the following, like 100A, 100A, 100B, 100C, and then so on and so
So what
forth.
was the reason for that?
The reason for that was just for clarity and to make it.
You know, it's been clear to
document
us in the select board for years.
Okay, I didn't,
So now
well,
it's changed.
I figured there was from when I looked at the document,
100A to,
so the sections all line up. It's just a question of swapping out 100, and that's why I'm here to go through the document with you. So, that being said, getting back to what I was discussing here is, so that's why that was changed. There were some sections that had 100 like 0.1A, 100.1B, you had some sections that didn't have it at all, so it was kind of all over the place, so I tried to synthesize that in a little bit of a different way. And also important to note that this is still a live document. I've edited this through once. I had our consultant take a look at it as well, but it is live. It's not 100% perfect. We may notice some errors and stuff in there, but just so that is a disclaimer, this is not going to be the 100% ready to go polished, but this is in a pretty good shape. We're done should be making any substantive changes to this document unless we get any other review from legal counsel or any other thing at this point. So,
question for you, what was section 622?
622,
Yeah, they removed it, what is it?
yeah, that was removed. Again, I'm gonna get to all that, so if we
Okay.
can just get running through the document here.
Is this legal approved so far? I mean, at this point,
So what I have done with this, and this is kind of more at the direction of Etienne, the planning commission chair, because he wanted to make sure you guys had a chance to see it kind of as we're moving through the process in case there was any larger substantive changes that we'd have to make before we had full legal review of the entire document. What legal is reviewing now are the more substantive changes that were made by that were recommended to us by legal and stuff like that, and some language. So basically, he has the language that we came up with to address his specific concerns, so we're
So
waiting
you've
for that
tried to
feedback.
address the attorney's.
Yes, absolutely.
Fundamental legal questions,
Absolutely.
that's what Carl was asking.
Yes, and that's what that
Legal
came from.
problem with the.
Yeah, that's what we were working,
Just changed.
that's what we were really working
Okay.
through here,
Okay.
and Etienne's on his way.
Okay.
Another question for you, why does everything have to be approved by an attorney?
That's pretty standard practice for how most bylaws are done.
Well, you know, our old bylaws, Todd had been around for 12 years, he never had a case overturned by the environmental court.
Okay.
So, you know, what was wrong with what was already there?
I have a number of issues with it, and we're gonna go into it in detail. But I will say it is not uncommon to have multiple rounds of legal review on a bylaw. I've seen it happen in the town I worked in Richmond, where the attorney looked at one section 3-4 times. We're talking the section, not the bylaw, one piece of the bylaw.
I think the challenge here, Bob, is, you know, in this latest round, well, before Tyler showed up, the town decided to, run the bylaws through an attorney. So once you ask an attorney and they tell you that you have unlawful things, you kind of have to address it. So I would just say, in this case, Tyler inherited it. It inherited the fact that now it's happening.
This has started up since we got the new town manager. Prior to
It
that,
was in that time, yes, it was after Tyler left and before Tyler was here. There was a consultant working on this, and then the whole thing got sent to an attorney. And you were all at the meeting when it was raised that the attorney had said there's a whole lot of unlawful sections in this code. Now that an attorney's told you that, you can't look the other way, even though you've never lost a case, right? Because you've been told it's unlawful.
if the attorney's opinion is correct, I mean.
Fair enough, but the town would have to get another attorney to say that's not true, which is kind of what we did. When the consultant said that he thought it was unlawful for us for you to have any vote at all. And we said, well, here's our attorney said, well, here's the section, and so we can overturn their attorney, right? So, anyway, that's how we got to the attorney, just so you have the background. In this case, he inherited that,
Mhm.
so I just wanted to be clear on that.
Yeah, so really the big sections here, so we're kind of getting into the document. Section 100 through 120. There really wasn't any substantive changes made to those sections. There was, again, my edits made towards, adjusting the numbers from like 100.1 to like A, B, C, and D. But other than that, the content between the two isn't any significant changes. Section 200. The zoning, in the zoning, 200A, there used to be a district in there which was mixed office, residential zone, that was removed from the list of districts. 200.1. Subsection E, was changed to note that the rounding will be rounded down to the nearest whole number than rounded up. That matters for density, right? So for example, like if your minimum zoning area is 2 acres, like for a unit, right? And somebody wants to put an additional dwelling, and let's say they have 2.8 acres. This is saying is you have to have the full Monty if you want to get the extra unit, right? So you can't have part of the, you can't have 2.8 or 2.6, because that could create a potential where you have a lot more density being allowed than what you actually have the acreage for. So most towns, as a general rule of practice, you would round down. So that's simply clarifying that, and that was a comment that was made to us by the town attorney. Sections 200 through 203, there weren't really any substantive changes made there. Section 204. There was, the dimensional waiver standards were reduced across the board. In the NDR district, it was reduced to 5%, down from 25%, and 15% in all other zones. In addition, 204.D 204.D.6 outlines a list of desirable public improvements that if you wanna get the waiver, so to get a waiver, you have to satisfy at least two of the following goals noted in the waiver section. In D, so one of which is in 6, it notes that there are some public improvement standards, so that what we did there was add more clarity around what those standards are and what types of projects would fall into that. There's also noted, we added some uses in 204F. That were added to the use table. One of them is short-term rentals, five bedrooms, and one was 4 bedrooms or fewer. That kind of came about, and the planning commission hasn't had a chance to see this part yet, because this came up when somebody actually called me the other day. I kind of realized we had a little bit of a problem with the short-term rental regulations, in that was potentially a loophole that would allow people to build essentially 4 units, a 4-bedroom building and rent it out short term, and it would be totally exempt from zoning, which I don't think was the intent of that section when it was added in. So it was basically, and we'll get to that later, I added in a section that addressed that issue.
Do you still have the caveat that it has to be owner occupied?
Yeah, that the substance of the intent of the language wasn't changed at all. It was just clarifying what I thought was a potential loophole that could allow for, somebody to kind of come in and play games essentially and say, well, this is a short-term rental. I don't need to get any permit at all. And the way the language was written seemed to indicate that was the case. I ran it by our consultant as well to see if he agreed with my interpretation of it. He said, yeah, somebody could do that. And again, if somebody came in today, under the 2023 bylaws and tried to do that, I would still fight it, but it gives them an avenue to have a substantive appeal because the language is ambiguous. So I'm trying to help to fix that. Granted, the planning commission hasn't had a chance to review that particular section yet, but I wanted to make sure you guys had a chance to look at it in here. Another thing that was added was multiple principal uses on a lot. So one of the issues that we have with our zoning bylaw right now is it is completely silent in how you permit multiple uses in a building or multiple uses on a lot. That's problematic because we have buildings that have multiple principal uses in them currently. But the regulations are entirely silent as to how we permit them, what type of review they're supposed to receive. So what this is intended to do is to provide us a vehicle and explicitly say how we do that. We're gonna get into how we do that a little bit later, but that's what that is intended to do. So it's just noting that these are not, there's a couple of uses that were added in. And again, you see the mental table and also 204G. That was added. There were some changes that were made there. Largely a result of Act 181 and the Home Act that was required. For example, some of the minimum, we can't treat a 2-dwelling building any differently than a 1-building dwelling. So there was some work done there to make sure that there was uniformity across that, because we have to treat them the same. Moving on. Section 205 clarifies that dwelling units, 1 single family, 2 family are exempt from site plan review. Again, this is due to the Home Act. I can't require a higher review standard for a duplex than I would for a single family home. However, there was some language that I added in there just clarifying that I still have the ability to, actually that's in 206, but. So section 206A notes that building renderings may be required to ensure compliance with the design review standards that are noted in section 206, and 206 has, quite a few design standards. The standards themselves really haven't changed at all, aside from, again, their numbering from what was already in here. It just clarifies what clarifies when they would apply. I also did add some language in here that notes that while I'm not approving the design of a house if it's a 1 or 2 bedroom. One of the things I do require on any zoning permit that I receive is an applicant to give me, the application itself. Location map showing where the structure is located on the property. And an rendering of the exterior of the building, and that takes a variety of forms. It's everything from professionally engineered and prepared plans to, somebody drawing something on a piece of paper. And again, to scale the development kind of dictates what I like to see. You want to put together a lean-to on your property in the RRA. You have a 10-acre parcel, you're putting the shed in the middle of the property. That's a little bit different level of review than, say, a multifamily or 4-bedroom or duplex right here in the village, right? Where you have tighter setbacks, things like that, more margin for error. So I just wanted to make sure I still had the ability to, while we're saying we're exempt from site plan review, I'm saying I can still require an applicant to give me that material. Just for the fact that I can document that I permitted a specific structure that looked like this in a certain spot. So if anybody asks, which people tend to do. Is that making sense to everybody so far? Perfect. Let's see here. Yep, and again, there's additional building standards that are noted. It's in section 206B 1 through 12. Goes through architectural repetition. Again, you've seen a lot of this stuff. This is already in the 2023 bylaw. There was a section that was added in here in C that notes the specific design standards for cottage courts. So cottage court development is again more of it's a type of multifamily housing that you can have, and rather than have it in one building, it's a series of like apartments more or less clustered together, usually around like a green or something like that. So there outlines the design standards and that a cottage court development takes. It also notes that usually like how big does the courtyard have to be, some of the density, the dwelling size, all those sorts of things. Those are what's housed there.
This is nothing in here about color of buildings in the village.
Would you be referring to the gondolas, building? Yes, I did receive a couple calls about that, and that's one thing, I mean, we could look to add in the future. We do not currently regulate, let's say, nobody has to provide me a paint swatch that says, here's the type of color. Or we don't have a list of approved paint swatches that say, here is the colors that are supposed to be there. It is a rather bright red. I will say.
Sure.
Yeah, I kind of like it, to be honest with you.
I think it's a mix, and that's always where that's always where it's tough when you get into stuff like this, right? When you're arguing aesthetics, right?
Yeah.
Somebody's gonna look at that and say, boy, that's actually kind of cool and neat. I have other people come in and say it's the most god awful color that they've ever seen, right? And that's beauty, as they say, is in the eye of the beholder to a certain extent. Now, that is something longer term, if there is more of an appetite, particularly in the village and things like that around design standards or wanting more of that level of review, especially given that we have that designated downtown designation back, that is certainly things that we could consider in the future. That's not what we currently are doing, but
Oh, it's in the historic district too. There's no specs for.
I looked for, not for the color, not for the paint, no. I looked. Trust me, I had more than one call about the color, one of which was from our economic development coordinator, and I went and looked, I'm like, we regulate the material of the side, the cladding, not what the paint is. So moving on, so again, 207 to 203, there weren't really any substantive changes to these sections. Same thing for sections 310 through 330. There was a substantive change, and this is again also one that I wanted to add and one the attorney recommended. We had temporary structures in there, but we didn't really define what that was. So that definition was added into the definition section, as well as some of the definitions around agriculture and like what makes something a farm, what makes a farm structure, right? A lot of those are listed from state statute.
Now, is a shipping container a temporary structure?
It's a good question. I think it depends on if it is up for less than hundred and eighty days, it would be, and typically anything like that should probably require a permit.
I would think that if it's on wheels, it isn't, but if it's on the ground, it is.
I would argue that it would be as well. I mean, the tricky thing would be is like if somebody has a container there for a short period of time and then it's picked up and moved,
Oh,
it
yeah,
probably should
they're
require a
renting it
permit.
while they're redoing their house or something.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about, but there's a lot of people around town that put those things in,
They never leave.
put a car in it, and instead of building a garage or a shed, because they don't have to pay taxes on a shipping container.
Yeah, the short answer to that would be is like, yes, if it would meet the definition of a structure. I would require a permit for that. Now, the question is also enforcement is complaint driven, so there's probably a bunch of them that exist that haven't made it to me. And if I hear one, I look into it, and that's how we do enforcement, just because it's, it's a one-man operation, so it's hard to go out and, proactively drive around to do it in an equitable way. Because you can't just have the misfortune of, hey, I drive home a certain way every night and I see your Connex container. Meanwhile, somebody who's living up in Sterling Valley has got 3 on their property and they have a 10-acre property and nobody sees it, nobody knows about it. I try and be somewhat equitable on how you do that. And that's based on advice I've gotten an attorney and how you do zoning enforcement. It's gotta be, you have to have some fair way of doing it. And the best way that I have with the resources that I have is to have it be complaint driven. There's certain inequities with that, like if somebody who gets along well with your neighbors, right? They may not necessarily care if they're not doing something that doesn't comply with the rules. Other neighbors care more than others, I guess you could say, and they have a little bit more higher level of scrutiny, but it's the best.
My point is to make them get rid of it. My point is they should be paying taxes on it, if it's a dwelling or a building.
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. Like I said, I'm not, in terms of what it should be valued, that's more of a question for Kevin and the listers,
I'll
but
tell you, in the town I live in, they look at the flyovers from Google and all those people on a regular basis, and like once a year, because they're flying them all the time now. And listers know exactly what to go look at, and they tell the zoning officer what to go look at, and it's definitely repeatable and fair to everybody, because everyone's getting pounded every year.
yeah, and that's the thing, it's just making sure that it's not just a one-off or that it happens to be that, again, I drove Route 100 one day or 15A where it was easy to get around and saw things, and
Yeah.
people who live up in the little bit more
Kevin-
remote
Kevin
don't have
can tell you,
that.
he lives on Google, he could tell you everything that's changed on that,
Yeah.
right?
To meet them.
Yeah.
Let me see here. And so it just clarifies like what something needs to be, and that getting back to B5 and 400. What it needs to be considered an ag structure, right? It's not just, oh, I have a greenhouse and it's exempt.
And you've stayed very careful to the state requirements on that since.
It's inherited by statute, so it's,
We have special buttons on all the keyboards.
if you have required agricultural practices, if you're under the umbrella of RAPS.
Yeah.
You're a farm,
Thank you.
your farm structures are exempt. I don't play, and I have a fairly, if I can reasonably make the case that it is a ag structure, it's an ag structure. So like lean-tos, barns, sheds, maybe your Connex container. If I can look at that and like, okay, that has some legitimate, could potentially be used for agricultural purposes, and somebody files a notice of intent to build a farm structure, I consider it exempt. Housing is not exempt, at least right now. The legislature did consider adding an exemption for farm housing, but that's not in the law right now. And it also outlines like, there's also, instead of, in addition to required agricultural practices, there's practices around silviculture, all those sorts of things, forestry stuff that would also be exempt. So like if you logging and you put in a road to a bridge, a temporary bridge to access a certain piece of the property and its pallets and whatnot, as long as it meets state standards, as long as you're following what that is, I would consider that to be exempt. Let's go on. There's a few other ones here. So going on to 400, again, this also notes like what types of an F and G. Notes what types of application materials that we expect. For certain types of development. Typically, again, if it's a house, what I or a dwelling unit, being an accessory dwelling unit, or a, you know, a principal dwelling unit. At a minimum, it's gonna need, I need my application, exterior renderings, you know, copy of, you know, access permit typically, if it has an access permit. If there's an existing, obvious existing driveway or existing home and somebody's remodeling that, they don't need that because it has an access. Copy of the wastewater permit, or in your guys' case, something from the Morrisville Water and Light that says that you have adequate capacity to service the property. If I don't have that, I don't issue a permit. I don't issue a permit and make it a condition of approval. If you don't have it, it's a do not pass go. I'm not issuing a zoning permit unless I have that. So that's something I'm pretty militant about. Moving on, sections 405 through 515. There weren't really any substantive changes to that section. Now, coming up, there was in section 420, there was this basically was a significant amount of rewrite. So how we had done this before, and this was based on comments by the town's attorney. So if you're noting here, it's noting require provisions prohibit effects of Act 24 VSA 4412. How we had originally dealt with 4412 is we just cited it. And then we referenced a few pieces of it in here. According to our attorney, we can't do that because there's certain things in 4412 that are optional, that a municipality kind of has to proactively say, we want to do this, or we don't want to do this. So if you just cite the section, it's ambiguous as to whether the town does or doesn't want to allow something because there's a decision.
Section 4412 is.
4412, it deals with.
No, but I don't know the thing that's time.
Yeah, so 4412 deals with, again, specific things that you can, you know, that you can choose to allow or not allow in a particular district. So what we did was we copied pretty much verbatim in here state statute from that section. We went through, there's certain things that aren't really ambiguous. There are decision points, like there's flood hazard bylaws. You know, we can't prohibit, like you can't prohibit residential care homes, group homes, you know, substance treatment centers, things like that. Like you can't do that under state statute, and it outlines kind of what you have to allow there. There were a few others that were optional, and those were choosing whether or not we wanted to allow development on small lots, or like lots that have less than the required acreage in the particular district.
So non-conforming.
Legally non-conforming lots. So we opted to not allow that unless it's connected to municipal water and sewer, because typically that area has, and especially if it's in like the CB district where there's really no minimum lot size, you can have essentially postage stamp size lots. Now granted, you still have to have, if somebody came in and wanted to build a bunch of homes on a very, very small parcel, they still have to have the allocation to do that. So there's a governor there on that. But we said that unless it's connected to municipal water and sewer, it's gonna be prohibited to be developed. Also, if you have two micro lots, for lack of a better word, that are held in common ownership, and neither one of them, and they are contiguous, and neither one of them has enough acreage to be its own lot, they're automatically deemed merged to make them conforming or more conforming, even if you have one that still doesn't have enough despite that. So that's what those sections really deal with. Yeah, so D through H really deals with a lot of the choices that were made there. So those are the specific sections in 420 that deal with, you know, those are more decision points. So the town can decide they want to do this, they can decide they didn't want to do it. So the language that we adopted here was basically recommended by the attorney, more or less. Moving on. Section 425. That there were notes that there was changes that were intended to clarify, make farm fences exempt, right? Again, saying that you couldn't just say it was before we just had, oh, it's a farm. If it's a farm fence, it's exempt. It says it has to be on an actual farm that follows RAPs, that meets the definitions that are noted in section 910. You can't just say can't be somebody's fun farm, for lack of a better word, and that they put a fence on, that would still require a permit. Let's see
So
here.
you can't build that really big fence at your house, Carl. That's what I just heard. without a permit.
Well, you can if there's 8, and there are, if it's 8 feet or taller, that would need conditional use review. If it's shorter than 8 feet, like usually it's around 6, that is exempt.
On any property, right?
Yep,
So I can put up a
That's
fence
what-
that's less.
as long, if it's on the property boundary, yes,
That's
that's
why
right.
that's why we put these fences. up.
Except for the front one is 4 feet
Okay,
around there, so it's 4 foot.
That's why this one's 6 feet out here that we just put in.
Again, you could get a larger one if you wished, it would just require approval by the
Yeah.
development review board. So 426 through 440, there weren't any substantive changes there. So there was language added in B through E. That was to clarify some of the parking and driveway requirements. And that was just to kind of gives a little bit more detail on what they required in terms of. The dimensions that the driveway has to be and like how you kind of approach a public road, things like that, and like certain of the standards that you need to have there. 453 to 490, again, there weren't some major changes to that. On there, we do start to get into more substantive changes again. In 500 through 506. Yeah. So this clarifies what types of projects are subject to site plan review here. And what are the site plan requirements? And again, this is the section here in this section where I note that say, hey. I'm not necessarily approving the site plan for like a 1 or 2 bedroom house. There's not like site plan design standards you need for a 1 or 2 bedroom house. But I do require that you show me, here is where my structures are going to go, and provided you meet the setbacks for that. And you're not in like a wetland or some other thing that would prohibit you from building, like the floodplain, something to that effect. I would generally say, yep, that looks great. Make sure you actually build it where you said you're gonna build it, not 100 feet away from where you said you're gonna build it. I've had that happen. Somebody moved a house about 100 feet closer to the road than where they originally, not here, but in another town, and that's where you can create problems pretty quickly. Let's see here. And this also notes again that multiple principal use structures on a lot are gonna be subject to site plan review. So again, it's not saying what we're not doing there is we're not saying that you can't have multiple principal structures on a lot. That's kind of, we're gonna get into what that looks like, but it's essentially going to be by right for the district that's in there, like you're allowed the uses that you're allowed. This gives the development review board the ability to prove what that looks like. So your screening, your parking, landscaping requirements. And that's really intended to make sure that, because it is a more intense use, so it's trying to strike the balance between allowing developers multiple uses on a lot, that flexibility, while making sure that we're balancing their neighbors' concerns of like, hey, we want to make sure we have the ability to speak out in a public hearing if we have concerns about, noise, setback, landscaping, traffic, all those types of things. So it's trying to strike that balance. Because originally one of the ideas that I kicked around, there is something in here, we have it, but not the full thing. It's a planned unit development or PUD. So that's typically, it's a vehicle and state statute that allows you to have multiple principal uses on a lot or multiple structures on a lot. And that takes the form of like either your traditional kind of conservation subdivision, which allows for more condensed development, like smaller lot sizes, provided that you conserve the remaining undeveloped land. That would fall into that category. And also like, you wanna have like a traditional mixed use building, right? You wanna have like aggressive ground floor, commercial, residential second floor, pretty standard stuff. That's all how that vehicle is used oftentimes to permit those structures. The problem with that is that typically requires conditional use review by the development review board, which is a slower process, right? And now that's where the board can say, we will decide whether we want to allow the use or not. The use in this model is you're allowed the use. The only thing the board is weighing in on is what does the use look like? So there's that little compromise a little bit there with the developer. Between not making sure every time you wanted to have a use added to the building, it had to be approved. And the site plan had to be approved, so now the use is more or less approved, unless it's a conditional use that you're trying to add to one of those buildings anyways. But if, let's say, every building, every use you want in a building is a permitted use, right? The board isn't gonna say, no, we're not gonna allow that, right? Because they're permitted uses, they're by right. The board is only gonna weigh in, okay, what is it gonna look like? So you can use all the uses, you just have to make sure it complies to the site plan. So that's trying to strike that balance, and that was, I think, a good way of dealing with respecting the fact that this community, I think, on the whole, and I think it's a good thing, is fairly pro-development, and I think that's good. So trying to strike that balance, I think, between the two.
So, correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is this mixed use, you can have commercial and residential in the same area,
In the same building,
in the same building.
yes.
And it doesn't have to be in an area that's zoned for commercial?
No, we're gonna get into this particulars of what that looks like, because that's a very good question, and we did talk specifically about that. We're
They
trying,
outlawed what was it,
yeah, the mixed
mixed
office.
office residential.
Yeah, so I know we're not trying to sneak that back in, but what essentially what this does is, and we'll get to that actually coming up pretty soon.
Okay.
Actually, I'm thinking the next section. So it just kind of clarifies what application's gonna trigger it, and just outlines a little bit more detail. What types of things that we wanna see with that, like be the landscaping, what does that look like? What additional standards we want for landscaping, other application materials. And again, site restoration, that sort of stuff. Now, this gets to the meat and potatoes, and I will run through this section pretty much verbatim, because this is one of the more substantive ones. So what this section does,
What section?
Where are you?
is section 510.
Okay.
So this is a biggie. And we'll run through this word for word, and I think this will answer your questions. So multiple uses on a lot, and it applies only to the CB, the commercial, the MOR, IND, and the hospital district. So this excludes explicitly any of the purely the more residential districts, high density residential, medium density, low density, and the RRA. So that's where would kind of keep out your mixed use buildings and stuff like that. All of a sudden popping up in Sterling Valley that have commercial office space and like apartments or things like that. Like you can't have multiple principal uses on a lot there, so we're clarifying that. So basically, all lots in these districts are allowed any use noted in section, I'm gonna have to update that, 245A, but it's gonna be in the use table. That would be in the new version. Again, live document. So it's the 204F. There it is. So 204F. So according to the district they're located in. So if we look at the use table in 204F, so again, looking at the CB, the commercial, the MOR, the IND, any lot is automatically assumed to have these uses allowed on them. Meaning that you can have a lot that has as many of those uses as you want on it. You just have to apply for, to apply for the multifamily, for the multiple principal uses on a lot. And again, if they're all permitted uses, the uses themselves don't require approval by the DRB, but the site plan that those uses take would require review.
What's MOR?
MOR. Let's see.
You see that?
Page 36.
Say it again.
Yeah, that's one of the ones that was removed.
Yeah, but I don't see any zone that's MO.
Mixed
Yeah.
office residential.
Yeah, that one's gotta go, so
Yeah.
cross that out, again, live document, so I crossed that out, so it'd be the CB, COM, IND, and hospital districts in that case.
Yeah, it's not even MO, it's not even on.
It's not even on the
There you
list.
go.
Yeah, we took it off, so that's one of those ones.
Isn't that helpful?
So this use may be allowed in any principal or accessory structure, provided they meet the dimensional requirements for the district they're located in, as noted in the use table. In this case, it would be 204G. New structures containing multiple principal uses, with all the uses being permitted uses, shall have their site plan approved by the Development Review Board through site plan review as noted in section 500 of the bylaws. All lots with existing structures can contain multiple principal uses and shall not require site plan approval to add a use, so long as any existing or proposed use do not require any change noted in 2 of this section. And the proposed use is not a conditional use as noted in 2045A. So basically, okay, so 2, I'll have to change that to B. I went through a couple different numbering schemes with that, but essentially what that is saying is that if you have a pre-existing building, right, that has a pre-approved site, and the use that you're looking to add to it, let's say you're going from a professional office to like a massage place or some other thing that really all you're doing is changing the use inside, but you don't have to change the building, you don't have to change the parking, you're not proposing to change the landscaping, anything like that, you can just pull a zoning permit for that and do that, or have the use added to the building. But if you wanna come in and you wanna enlarge the building, you wanna change the parking, you gotta change the landscaping, that's gonna require the DRB to approve that. So it's trying to respect the fact, let's say on Main Street, right? You're unlikely to see a lot of real significant changes to those buildings, given the fact you really, unless you completely knock the building down and rebuild it, which you could do in certain respects. I mean, most of them are historic anyways as well. So it's allowing you to capture the fact that there's multiple uses going on there right now. And I wouldn't want somebody that doesn't really have any site plan or other things to automatically have to have their site plan approved by the DRB when there isn't really any site plan to review. It's kind of defeats the point of doing that. So if it doesn't hit one of those triggers, you don't have to modify it, you don't have to have the DRB approve the site plan.
So if they were going from office space to a hairdresser, it would require water, wastewater update.
In that case, again, it wouldn't absolve them from getting any other required local municipal permits. Yeah, again, I wouldn't typically look at that for like and again, from a zoning perspective, because again, it's not something explicitly spelled out in like the hairdresser regulations. That is something we could look at.
How would the applicant know if they're exempt? They even call us and tell us if they're changing the use.
Yeah, and I think that might be one, and again, this is, and to be fair, I am not blind to the fact that we will probably end up having to change what that looks like, as we move forward in other iterations as the hairdresser thing comes up, right? One of the other things, and we addressed it a little bit, but it's a longer term project of mine, is I think the definition section could use a little bit more beefing up in terms of like how we define things. We have a lot of very broad definitions that you can fit things in. But the problem with those broad definitions is if you want a more triggered, like to your point, if you're having a hairdresser come in, there's anticipated increases in water, wastewater associated with that. It may be worth say, hey, we regulate this particular use differently because we're anticipating than a professional office because we're expecting a higher demand on the system. We can look at that.
But if there isn't a trigger, what you'd expect to happen in our ordinances is within each of these zones, we'd start doing allocation based on the highest water sewer use available to that building, no matter what they're putting in. So they could be putting in a really low use, but since they'd have a right to never come to anybody again and going to the highest use, we'd have to charge that allocation. Well, that's what we're trying to avoid here.
Yeah, and we can certainly do that, or we can carve out a specific zone where there's more of that. A higher level review of that stuff. I mean, I have no zero problem with that. The question is, I'm not sure if we can work it into this specifically, because we could do it, but it's a question of, you know, how long does that take? And again, I can use the 2023 bylaw right now. It's not perfect, but I've been using it, you know, more or less successfully since I've got here. So we could, if there is a desire to more substantive change with some of that stuff, we could do it. Just know it's going to slow down, you know, this isn't gonna be implemented, you know, for a while longer. And that's, I'm agnostic as to that. My goal is to get something good. There's,
The easier way is, at least, you know, historically, your office has been a bit of eyes and ears. So if a person doesn't need a permit from you, but you know that they're changing use, you send them our way. That's what's historically happened. And then whether they need a permit from you or not, they know they need to come down and see us.
yeah,
And then we keep your ordinance simpler. It actually worked well that way for a really long time. And there's a lighter regulatory burden on people, but it's all worked pretty well. So whether we can figure out how to do that, we can talk about that offline, but
yeah, and I'm open to that. Again, you know, just, you know, that was more difficult for me to do, I think, initially when I got there, given how behind the eight ball, quite frankly, I was, and just trying to get, you know, get people's permits out the door, get things kind of caught back up. But new year, we can certainly start looking at that. Going on, so I'm just, if one of the proposed, so I'm now on 4B. If one of the proposed uses is a conditional use as noted in section 2045A, so that's gonna change that again, so that's in the use table. Then the project will be subject to conditional use review as noted in section 630 of the bylaw, and I'll double check to make sure that's the correct section it should be. The DRB shall approve all modifications to a site plan on a lot containing multiple principal uses using the standards noted in section 500 of the bylaws that involve any of the following. Change of the building footprint. So this triggers, okay, we have a building that's got multiple principal uses on it, somebody adds another use. What triggers the DRB to come back and look at this again? So change of the building's footprint, right? Change to the parking and traffic circulation pattern on the site. Change to the approved screening structures, right? Changes to an approved landscaping plan that involve the elimination or reduction of landscaping. Changing the species of landscaping is allowed without DRB approval, provided the number of plantings and trees is maintained and their location are not modified, and the applicants provide an updated landscaping plan from the zoning administrator to record. Then the zoning administrator may refer this new landscaping plan to the DRB for site plan approval at their discretion. So this is designed specifically to deal with something that I hated dealing with in Richmond. In that Richmond had any change to a property that had its approved site plan that required site plan approval by the DRB. You change the landscaping, any change to the landscaping require the DRB to approve it. So you swap roses for ficuses, you're going back to the DRB. Oh, you planted 99 trees instead of 100 trees. You gotta go back to the DRB. You ran into another problem where, let's say a property also has Act 250 jurisdiction, right? You could wind up with this ping pong scenario where they have an approved site plan from us. They go get an Act 250 permit. Act 250 permit requires them to plant additional landscaping, which is what I've seen happen. They didn't get the landscaping originally approved. Now they gotta go back and get the landscaping approved with the town, and you end up just going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. There's the new gas station that's in, off of, exit 12 there in Richmond. That was that particular gas station, and that took probably 6-7 months to permit after the fact we burnt, just because they had to go to Act 250. Act 250 made them change something. It triggered a change with us. We had to go back there. That change triggered them to go back to Act 250. So trying to kind of eliminate that by baking in a little flexibility, provided that, like, okay, provided you're keeping the number of plantings, we don't really care if you swap out, you know, red maple for a cedar tree, or, you know, for willow, for birch, or something to that effect. You know, and if it's something that I really feel is a big enough change that it needs to go to the board, I have the authority in there to require that to be moved. Lots located in the RRA, HDR, MDR, and LDR districts are limited to one principal use on a lot. Allowed uses for these districts are located in again, the use table 204 of the bylaws, so they change that. So what we're saying is that we're clarifying that in certain districts, you're allowed one principal use on a lot. In other districts where you typically would want more intense development, we're allowing that more intense development with some guardrails. Cause I gave the planning commission a variety of options. Some way less hands off than this, like where we allowed this in all the districts. Others where it was more restricted. This is kind of a little bit more in the middle. So that takes us through, should take us through 510. Now this one, this is another substantive section. 511. This is new and again, the planning commission haven't had a chance. To review that particular section yet, although it's gonna be on the agenda for next week, our next week's planning commission meeting. So if you read, and I'll read it right now. So what's weird about our short-term rental regulations is that we don't technically have short-term rental regulations in the classical sense. Because there isn't a section in here that regulates them, it's only regulated in the definition. Which is not ideally how you'd like to do that. You typically wanna have the definition section explaining. What's in the regulations or terms in the regulations, not have it contain regulations in and of itself, that should be in its own section. So, cause here was the problem as I saw it. So short-term rental is a structure or combination of structures on the same lot. That is required to be owner occupied, renting bedrooms to persons for a period of fewer than 30 consecutive days. Short-term rentals containing 8 or fewer bedrooms, maximum occupancy 16 people, must be approved by the Division of Fire Safety and have a valid state wastewater permit. Short-term rentals with 4 bedrooms or fewer, maximum occupancy 8 people is exempt from the above, and this is the problematic language, the above local permit requirements, but not the owner occupied provision. Short-term rental use is not a hotel or inn or motel use. So the reason that I keyed in on this, so it's my job as a zoning administrator to read the regulations literally. So you'll note here that this doesn't say is exempt from the above local permit requirements in this section. It just says it's exempt from the above local permit requirements. Well, what's above it? All of the zoning bylaws. So to clarify that and to deal with the fact that we really shouldn't have regulations in the definition section, they should be up front and then have the definitions in the back. I took essentially what was in the short-term rental regulations and the owner occupied section and created section 511 to it. I didn't really change anything in terms of like allowing more or allowing less. It was just trying to take it and put it in a more actionable form. So, and there is a distinction that's noted in here between 4 or fewer bedrooms and then, and this says 4 to 8, but I should really be 5 to 8. Short-term rental consisting of any structure or combination of structures on the same lot that is rented for 4 or fewer bedrooms to persons for a period of more than 14 days in a year or fewer than 30 consecutive days are an allowed use by right on a lot without a zoning permit if the following conditions are met. Because right now that is the case. I don't issue permits for short-term rentals when they come in. It's a by right use. I would issue a permit, let's say, for the structure that the ADU is in, or the structure that the short-term rental is in, but not necessarily for the short-term rental itself. So what that means is, let's say you have a property, you want to build an ADU on that property and rent it out short-term. I would regulate the ADU. I treat it as a dwelling, right? So it has to have water, has to have water sewer allocation or wastewater permit, exterior elevations, all the permitting stuff that I mentioned. And then once that's done, who you rent it out to is more or less your business. Now, you're still obligated to comply with the owner occupancy requirement. It is important to note, though, that there are some loopholes to that, and that firms, LLCs, trusts can own property and rent them out short term, and they kind of occupy the property. There's a few that are like that right now, heading out towards Stowe on First Light Lane, and LLCs own.
LLC doesn't own occupied property, they don't live there.
Well,
I
per,
would disagree.
no, I hear you there, but that's kind of how it's generally understood, because I've asked that from people at the state, like, how should we treat that? And they're like, yeah, that's how you treat it.
The purpose of this definition, when it was put in, was in part to get at not allowing the LLCs to basically take over all the new housing stock in town.
Yeah, and I hear that, but I think there's also some issues. So anyways, the intent behind that is, so I don't regulate.
Yeah, I don't see why you can't require that whoever has the short-term rental, like Airbnb, that they pay the residential tax rate. That's easy, you just go over to the listed office.
Well, it would, so again, if you're building a home on your property, right, and you're
Yeah.
renting it out short term, I treat it the same as I would any other home. So I issue a permit for it the same, it's treated as a dwelling.
But when you're telling me that there's Airbnbs now that are LLCs, that you gotta allow even if they don't live there.
I would say is that the issue is if it's owner occupied, and again, I've seen properties, residential properties owned by trusts. They occupy that property, they
Well,
can.
that's fine, I'm not talking about that. But they're also getting the residential tax rate.
Again, how it gets taxed, and I'm not trying to dodge the question, it's just, I don't deal at all with the tax rate, that's really a question for Kevin, in the lister's
I
office.
mean, I go through the grand list and I see places that, yeah, such and such a trust, or such and such LLC, but they're paying the residential tax rate.
And again, that's probably because it's a residential structure, so again, I don't think it would exempt it, again, I treat it. All this is saying is, here's how you rent your property out. Short term, if you want it to be a short term
I'll
rental.
just use this as an example.
Mm.
We have a commercial rate for electricity, we have a residential rate.
Mm.
Well, there's been instances where these people have been paying the residential rate and it's not a residence, and they
Mm.
started complaining about the bill went way up, and they've got like 10 rooms and a swimming pool and all this other stuff. And they complained that their costs went up, and then I think Penny said, well, this isn't a resident, you should be paying the commercial.
Yeah, and I think that's, that's fair, and again, what I was trying to do here, and again, is to address a problem that I saw that kind of came up through conversation with somebody inquiring about short-term rentals. I was trying to not rewrite the definition of short-term rentals, because I know that was a contentious process when we did it. And I was more or less just trying to capture what you had existing in here and make it actionable in a way that kind of kept the spirit of what I thought was in here, while closing up some loopholes, saying that, well, you can't just say, well, I'm building a short-term rental. The definition says that it's exempt from all the above local permitting requirements. Therefore, I don't need a permit for this 4-bedroom house that I'm renting out short-term. I
Yeah,
was trying to nip that.
building it, you do, but you already have it, but if you don't live there, you can't do it.
No, you still you still have your owner occupancy
Yeah.
requirement, for sure, but what I'm trying to do is to clarify, to get around somebody trying to be creative with that and trying to build a house. Cause again, there's one important thing too to remember, this is a unique quirk to our rules, our definition of duplex. Is that anywhere as you build a single family home. In Morristown, by right, you're allowed a duplex. Duplexes can take one of two forms in Morrisville. They can either be a traditional duplex, right? You have a shared wall or something that's attached in one building. Or it's two single family homes on the same lot. Now notice, single family home, it's got the same dimensional standards. So you're typically, like if you're doing an ADU, typically an ADU is capped at 60% of the habitable floor area of the principal structure, or 1,000 square, whatever's last typically. It's designed to make it like clearly subordinate to one of the structures on the property. However, because the way we define duplex, there's no size restriction on that. You could have as big a duplex, second home on your property as you want, provided that you meet the setback requirements, because we don't have lot coverage requirements. Again, we don't restrict, you could, as long as you stay within the setbacks and don't build inside of that, you can cover most of your property with structures or impervious stuff, and you might hit some state triggers there, but from a local permitting standpoint, We don't regulate how much of a lot can or can't be developed. Now, that's a different conversation. There are definitely towns that do that. Richmond capped it in a residential area for 40% of the land that could be developed, the rest of it couldn't. We don't have that at all, and that's, you know, there's pluses and minuses to that. The pluses are is that allows for people to really develop their lots and maybe build more housing, which is in need of in the town. That does come with the expenses that you can really build out some lots. We don't have a governor saying that you can't have two 5,000 square foot homes on the same lot if you have and I've issued a permit for one. So I know that's happened. I mean, is it gonna happen? You know, am I gonna get 10 of those a year? No, but they will happen. So it's important to kind of bear that out. That's why I was concerned about this, like, well, okay. Somebody comes in, they wanna build a duplex, they take one of the duplexes and say, it's a short-term rental. Doesn't need to be permitted, and you have a 5,000 square foot home that didn't get a local zoning permit because it's a short-term rental. So I was trying to kind of nip that in the bud.
One other question, it's, I guess it's, 211A. 3. Short-term rental is a right by use, it does not require a permit. And then the last. Or structure that the bedroom or bedrooms are contained in will still be required to obtain a zoning permit.
That's why I put that in.
Okay. If everybody that already has an Airbnb in town, do they have to come back and get a zoning permit?
Nope. And again, any new zoning change that you have
Just-
is grandfathered, would be grandfathered anyways. You get held harmless. Like if we change a rule, right, let's say again, you would have, let's say if we, for whatever reason. We banned, not that we could do that, but we banned short-term rentals or something in a particular district, right? And you had a short-term rental there. That short-term rental could exist in its present state in perpetuity, provided it's not expanded or changed, because it's grandfathered in. You couldn't do a new one. Right, but that would be grandfathered in regardless of what we change, because you gotta hold your harmless to that.
Well, you're gonna be grandfathered if you didn't comply with the existing regulation before.
To a certain extent, yeah, I think that's fair, but there's not much I can do about that. I'm just trying to nip
Plenty
it.
of Airbnbs in this village that aren't owner occupied, and we've had the owner occupied rule for at least 10 years. I mean, the town's had it for probably 6.
Yeah, and there's tricky thing, it is difficult to enforce, and
This
it
one,
just
it
is.
was known the last time this was modified, it was talked about at the joint meeting that you all had. That this thing would be virtually unenforceable, because you've noted it, if it's a right. Under certain conditions, and the condition is owner occupied, you'd have to go inspect every single Airbnb on your list. To determine if they're still owner occupied.
Now,
Now, the theory at the time was when property transfers happened, it'd be a trigger and you could at least check in on it. But the odds of that happening are pretty dang low, because you'd have to have an internal mechanism to make sure that. You know, the assessor's office and the people keeping the land records told you every time that there was a property that changed hands. That used to be on an Airbnb list, so it's got really hard to enforce the way this is put together, and. I get, the intent was to try to really narrow it and make sure it's only owner occupied, and that was kind of the compromise the last time we changed this, when that definition was added. And everyone knew at the time, it was said very openly that by your predecessor and others, it'd be really hard to enforce this thing.
yeah, I mean, there's ways you can do it. I mean, if you go to any planning conference or any VLCT conference, there's software companies there. I get solicitations saying, hey, are you interested in regulating short-term rentals? Because that's what they do. They'll go on VRBO, Airbnb, all those kind of the big ones, and kind of comb through it, do a big data
But then
dump.
somehow you have to know if it's owner occupied, that's the challenge.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those, again, if enforcement is complaint driven, right? Somebody has to kind of make that, more or less make that complaint. Now, I think this will get at a lot of the questions that are, like, what's
We
the,
have a lot of Airbnbs that are not owner occupied.
They predate, many of them predate.
Well, many of them don't predate the zoning regulations, it's just, they did it
We
anyway.
just did it.
yeah. So this goes into, again, so I'm just gonna go through A and just go through the number, because this will hit what the triggers kind of are, like what we regulate with them, right? The property must be owner occupied per the definition of owner occupancy noted in section 900 of the bylaws.
Before you go further.
Sure.
The sentence right above that, I guess maybe I'm reading it wrong, but I think you got a typo. After 30 consecutive days are allowed use by right on any lot. Am I reading that? I'm not understanding that.
And I'm missing an and. In allowed use by right on any law. So basically what it's saying is that if you rent out something, you know, if you rent it out for more than 14 days, but fewer than 30 consecutive days, it's a short-term rental, right? Otherwise, it's the same as an apartment, right? That's how I would treat it.
Good.
The property must be owner occupied per the definition of owner occupied noted in section 900 of the bylaws. Structure or structures where the bedrooms are located must have a valid state wastewater permit for the number of bedrooms. So what I'm saying there is that I would wanna make sure that, you know,
So one thing you should think about, because it's located in many places through the ordinance, should probably say valid state wastewater permit or connection.
yeah,
Yeah, because a lot of, the way it's written, if they were in the village, they couldn't comply with the zoning law. Because they wouldn't get a state wastewater permit, they'd get a lot of them in.
Yeah. And again, this is the first kind of pass at this. I think, you know, when we come back in, I would like to Bob's point, come back in with a red line. My goal of this tonight was to really see if there's any big, like,
Yeah.
huge problems we need to go back and change. And then what we can do is I can do just a compare doc, which is what I try to do here with this one of just like, here's 2023, here's what we're proposing. And then we can go line by line through the whole
So
thing.
Again, all these things just apply to new construction.
Yeah,
So with that in mind, I'd keep you going because they have a full agenda.
okay, yeah, I can keep going, yeah, and that's why I was trying to,
If you're looking just for the bombs and.
yeah, this is a big, so, and
Good.
and I can speed it up. Does not apply to structures this would not apply to structures that are converting existing, bedrooms that are contained, but still requires zoning permit. This would not apply to structures that are converting existing square footage of a structure that does not require an alteration of the building's footprint or exterior elevations. So essentially with that is if it's all inside of the main one, they have an existing bedroom that's in there and they want to rent it out short term. We wouldn't essentially regulate, that would be allowed. They wouldn't have to get a new allocation for that. If they're adding bedrooms or stuff like that to do the use, they should get a wastewater permit for it. 5 to 8, it says 4 to 8, but it should be 5 to 8. Going on to B, short-term rentals consisting of any structure, combination of structures in the same lot, it essentially repeats what's up in A. From between 4 to 8 rooms to persons for a period of more than 14 days in a year or fewer than 30 consecutive days are permitted. Are a permitted or conditional use as noted in the use table in section 204E and are subject to the following regulations. Property must be owner occupied per the definition of owner occupancy noted in 500 of the bylaws. Requires conditional use approval per the standards noted in section 500B and section 630 of the bylaws. Short-term rentals must be approved by the Division of Fire Safety. Short-term rentals must have a valid state wastewater permit allowed allocation. Short-term rentals renting 9 or more bedrooms must meet the definition of a hotel, inn, or motel use. Short-term uses in a hotel, inn, or motel use with the said use regulating 9 or more bedrooms for 17 more people. So that's essentially what's outlining what would trigger, because there are certain short-term rentals that do require conditional use review by the DRB in certain circumstances in certain districts. The bulk of them are those 4-bedroom runs. There's very few, 5 to 8 bedroom, 80, the only ones that came to mind would have been the Money Moose property up on the end of Coat Hill Road. That was one that was a non-owner occupied short-term rental essentially, but they had multiple cabins that they rented out. So that kind of outlines that change. So what this is intended to do is to take the definition of short-term rentals in owner occupancy and to take the regulatory bits out of it, put it in a section without really trying to change what I thought the spirit of what was written in there at the time. Because again, I know it was contentious when you guys put it in there. I'm not trying to make it more contentious. I'm just trying to get rid of the fact, deal with the fact that we have really regulations in the definition section and just to clarify that. Moving on, 600 through 620, there weren't really any substantive changes made to that section. Section 622, section was removed, according to the advice of the town attorney. So that kind of,
Can you say a word about what that section covers?
Section 22, yeah, essentially what it was is informing people of kind of some legal remedies and things and stuff that they can do, so that's. Leaves it up to the applicant or whoever wants to appeal to go find it.
So your zoning code is not gonna give them.
Yeah, we're not handing them the rope, more or less, they gotta go buy it. So that was addressing, and Bob raised that question earlier. Section 630 through 630, through 660, same thing, no real substantive changes. We are getting into more meat potatoes here, and again, I'll try and move along. This helps clarify the definition between major and minor subdivisions and also clarifies your review process for major subdivisions. Our subdivision process was probably the one that, while it was legal, at least according to our attorney, was highly unusual in that it had a much more active role for the zoning administrator in that where I was essentially doing sketch plan review for projects. We didn't have preliminary subdivision review. It was all lumped into final, which is again, a very unusual way to handle major subdivisions. There isn't a town that abuts us that does it that way. I'm not saying there isn't someone somewheres that does it similar. And again, our attorney advised it was legal, but was extremely odd, not unconventional, I guess you could say. So my effort was to try and correct that. And that's what comes into where 720 comes in. So this is a pretty significant update to the subdivision process. It outlines kind of what the requirements are for like a pre-application. You have a sketch plan meeting. It outlines what that is. There is some language that we already had in here dealing with sketch plans. So that's kind of reordering that and putting it in here and beefing it up a little bit more. So, zoning administrator, myself, the DRB, if I refer one to the DRB, we would review it. And we would say, hey, this is what we'd want to see for you to come in for a major or minor application. If it's minor, I just deal with it. If it's major, it goes to the DRB. That's kind of where we get into.
This is minor, major defined somewhere.
Yes, that's in that section. So major is, let me see here. Let's see, hang a second.
Right under bonus. It's in 710C.
Thank you. Been staring at this for too long.
710B is minor.
Oh, I'm looking at the old ones.
If I'm reading this correctly.
Yep, hang on a second here. That major subdivision. For the purpose of these regulations, major subdivisions shall be defined as any proposed subdivision resulting in 3 or more new parcels in one parcel. Parent parcel, or any additional. So basically what we're saying there, it's. You can wind up with 4. It's 4 lots, right? So you have your parent parcel, 3 new lots. That's a major subdivision. A minor is parent parcel. 2 lots is a minor subdivision. So again, sketch plan approval, it kind of starts to run through that process. So sketch plan approval, and it just outlines what that's supposed to look like. I do need to, this is an error on my part. There is the preliminary subdivision approvals also in here, but it's gonna be its own section under 720, but it outlines the steps for preliminary subdivision. So what I want you to do is essentially you treat it as if you're coming in for final. We'll go through it. If there's outstanding items there, the board, or if the board puts conditions, they want to see additional information. Then prior to you coming in for finals, you gotta give me that information in order for you to come in and get your final approval. Because right now we run into situations where applicants come in for final and this is it. This is the last review. And if there's outstanding items, a lot of times what'll happen, they'll be conditioned on either me or the DRB or somebody else coming in and reviewing them, but that doesn't happen in a public hearing anymore unless the DRB chooses to continue this. So this is to try and provide a little bit more kind of accountability and transparency in the subdivision process to make sure that applicants understand that you need to provide this, right? If you don't provide it, you're not gonna go to final. So it's better off this, be upfront, give us what we need, and we kind of go from there to get it approved.
Now, can they keep changing it throughout the process?
No, so if you were to do that, right, if you have something. If the board required you to change something, they wouldn't have to necessarily go back to preliminary, they could bring that forward to
I'm
final.
just using my own experience, I mean. I was doing this for like 2.5 years, and I get everything I think I need. One of the neighbors says, there's a wetland back there, I hire a wetland engineer.
Mhm.
2 months later, I come back, oh, there's gonna be too much traffic, I gotta hire a traffic engineer.
No.
Forester.
Yeah.
And we just went on and on and on and on.
I would say that is not the first time I've heard, I've heard that particular story, unfortunately.
So finally, I just, I sold it to somebody else.
Yeah, and sidebar with that is how a lot of like those type of development projects get killed. It's not so much the town not doing it, is it just gets dragged out to such a point where it just doesn't become profitable to do anymore, and that's,
No,
not a year.
it got dragged out because the neighbors brought up something different every time there was a meeting.
Well, and that's more on the DRB, right? So again, how it's supposed to work, if there isn't a specific standard in here. Like, I hold you to what's in here. So if there's something there that doesn't say you need it, I'm not holding you to it. And I'm not gonna recommend that the board holds you to it. That being said, the opposite's also true. If it says you need X, Y, or Z,
So that's
I'm gonna
fine,
look
as
for
long as
X,
you
Y,
don't
or
go
Z.
in.
yeah, and that's what I'm about trying to do with this, is to try and nip some of that by. We're not winding up at final application and, oh, you didn't realize you need a wetland permit. You didn't realize you need to have your road approved by the select board ahead of time.
Well, I didn't need a wetlands permit, but I had to prove I didn't need it.
Right. So it's designed to try and, if we have more of that up front, you can bake it into the process, so these people know, you can kind of. Find that out before, ideally, when you're coming in for final, we should be pretty much in and out at that point. We should have dealt with all the major.
Well, every time we came in for final, it was something new.
Yeah,
And it was determined by the neighbors, it wasn't determined by the DRB.
Yeah. and to be fair, that's more state statute stuff. I will say Vermont does give a lot of deference to, and a lot of ability for abutting property owners or interested persons, which is very loosely defined. All you have to really do to be an interested person in state statute is come and give testimony.
Well, actually, the judge, the environmental judge, finally defined what an interested person was.
In your case? Or
And,
just,
and somebody across the street, so many feet away isn't.
yeah. Well, that's good. Again, getting just back to this here a little bit. So that's kind of, again, the changes here that were made on just kind of some of my recommendations. Cause I think this is a better process, an easier process, more transparent process for me to implement. And it also brings us more in state line, which is more commonly done. And not across other municipalities, and it shouldn't be a big burden to developers, cause again, most places follow a similar process. Section 730, just moving on here, just trying to be mindful of the time. There's some pieces added for clarity, content of these sections were not really altered, so what 730 really is kind of a little bit of a. These sections existed in various parts, but I thought they felt better in just this particular section here, so that's kind of where they wound up. The substance of the sections didn't change, their location did. And that gets us into the last really big meat and potatoes thing, was the PUD section. So what I essentially did with 510 is I took 510 was our in 2023 is our existing. Major subdivision, conservation subdivision regulations. I took those and moved them into the subdivision regulations, because I thought that was more appropriate than having them kind of divorced in their own section. And I took certain pieces out of it and made it a requirement for all major subdivisions, because they are a requirement for all major subdivisions. Any subdivision that is 4 lots or more is automatically a major subdivision, was automatically a conservation subdivision. So I took some of the language that was in 510 and moved it around the different spots, but the meat and potatoes of it is here in 740 now. Now, the content of that didn't really change, it's just in a different spot and just spread out and put in a couple other little sections preceding it, but it's all basically in 710. Yeah, like 720 is originally part of 720 was originally in the PUD stuff, I kind of just divorced it from that and put it in there, it still applies. So all that side of particular stuff there, that language is more or less verbatim. And then that really takes us through, we do have the definition section, I am trying to be mindful of time, I don't necessarily, if you guys want me to run through the major definitions, I can. I don't have to.
Any big substantive new definitions or mostly just?
Yeah, there were a few. Accessory on-farm businesses, these was added again. Because that is a use by right and state statute, we don't actually have it in here, you know, one of my bigger projects, I think, long term is beefing up our definition section. Because I think if it's not in here, I have to rely on Webster's or whatever a common definition is, because it's my job to interpret it literally.
Still exist.
It does, I have used it. Again, not often, but the more definitions you have, and I'm not for making the document bigger for the sake of making the document bigger, right? But
I hear
the
you.
more clarity that you have in there, the better it kind of is.
Yeah.
Just further clarifying accessory uses. Building height, that's where we reduced the building height down.
Yeah.
Cottage court development, just again defining what that is. Also redefining development a little bit.
Okay.
I'm trying to see here. Farm, adding what the definition of a farm is, again, it's the state statute of farm, you'll find it in state there. Farm structure was added. Parking off street was added. Private clubs was in there, some of these weren't necessarily me, they were already there, recovery residents. That was added again, we have to allow that per state statute, and I took the definition from state statute and added it in. RAPS, required agricultural practices, and that directs you to look up what RAPS is and state statute. Served by municipal water and sewer. That's a big one, because depending on what that is, there's density, there's a whole host of other things that are allocated towards that. And again, short-term rentals, is also in here, again, structure, combination of structures, so that first part that we read in that definition, that's in here. Let me see here. Structure, subdivision, temporary structures defined. So here it is, a walled or roof building, sign, wall, fence. Except wall or fence, there's an operating farm that is intended to be located on a property for no more than 180 days in calendar year. And that's really runs us through that. District boundaries, there's some corrections and stuff made there, but that's really the, meat and potatoes. And my takeaway from this, again, this is not a one and done kind of meeting. And I wasn't trying to give you guys short shrift and not give you guys the red line version, but this was to try and, I figured many of you hadn't even seen the latest version of this at a very broad level. So I wanted to take the time to do that with you guys tonight. And see if there was any big things that we needed to change before we really start drilling into the brass tacks of going back and cleaning up all the little reference issues and the other things like that, which is pretty tedious. Going through and numbering all this is, I've been doing it for basically the last 3 days, more or less going through and trying to tweak it, and I'll have to tweak it again, but.
If you could send us both of these documents in
Yeah.
PDF and also a red line.
Yeah.
And I can send that to you guys, and you can look at them or not. At your leisure.
Yeah, and I think also too, I know there was appetite, and I wasn't trying to neglect it, quite frankly, I just didn't have the bandwidth to do it. I know there's interest in seeing what was permitted, at least in your jurisdiction in terms of new development, stuff like that. It's on I could probably do that, what I might just do then is send you the red line version of this, and then I can send you that as well, because I know that has been something you've been interested in. I'm not sure if you have any questions at all for Etienne, I know he's been sitting here listening to you ramble the whole time.
Great.
Only one thing, it just happens to be near and dear to me since I go by every day on my road. A new, it's not a subdivision, but it's like 3 houses and a garage with an apartment over top of it on about a half-acre lot. So is that all in compliance? I'm assuming it is, it's pretty obviously.
What's the property?
We're at the corner of Mars Road and Route 12.
Yes, it does comply. I permitted that last year. It's they're connected to municipal water and sewer as well, so that's where you like that higher level of
In the
density.
village.
That's what it's intended to do, is to encourage that type, whether you like it or not, that's a different conversation, but that is the intent behind it, is to allow that
It's high
density.
density, that's for sure.
Yeah, that's not by accident, it's by design. Well, I appreciate everybody for letting me come in and chat to you, and again, as we move forward, now that I'm, at least for right now, ahead of things, we'll see how we are come May or June. I wouldn't mind trying to come and see you guys a little bit more. I know that's what you're used to, and I'd like to try and do that, and so we can just make sure everybody's on the same page.
Appreciate it, Paul. Thank you for
Thank
your
you.
time.
Thanks so much. Ready for capital? Ready for the capital plan?
Yes, sir.
Really, nothing terribly substantive has changed, so unless you looked at it and had questions for us,
Thank you again.
we don't, I mean, we have to spend a lot of time on it.
I have just one, should be an easy question. Is it the decommissioning of the pretty well,
Yes.
it's like $200,000.
That's what we've been told by our engineer, in order to tear, because it's not tearing down the building, that's cheap. But actually, how we have to treat the well itself, we'd probably have to fill it with bentonite.
Do that to what?
Fill it with the shaft with bentonite
Yeah,
and cap it, and that's more expensive than you think. That's the engineer's estimate, it's
I
not
would
our
think you
estimate.
just pour cement over the top of it and have the end of it.
It's not our estimate, came from our engineer, so I agree with you.
I don't know what bentonite is, but it's probably something like.
It's a mixture,
Kryptonite you get from outer
it's a
space.
slurry of clay and all kinds of other things that just make it so that you can't ever get back, nobody can fall in it, nobody can get hurt. And it doesn't contaminate anything, so.
You know, groundwater intake aquifer.
Correct. So
Wow.
that's probably what
Okay.
will be required.
Mhm.
And that number came from Alderman Schnelly.
I can't believe the cost of the wall around well 3.
Yeah.
What the hell's with that?
Have you seen the prices concrete lately?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not a whole lot.
Yeah.
I mean, the price of just getting a foundation now for a house is just outrageous.
That's right. So,
All right,
okay, well then, we'll keep moving on that, and that may be the final version. We're still trying to sift through things and see if there's a need to do a last version, but. But right now what's in there is what we are aware of.
Mhm.
So we'll keep it up to date, and when there's major changes, we'll share it with you. Perfect, thank you,
management update?
and thank you. I decided not to make these guys do any written bullets the day before Thanksgiving when I was sending out an early packet, so you wanna go first? Yours or Kevin go first, you wanna go first? Go ahead,
Oh, yeah, we did this.
do electric first.
I do got quite a bit on the list, so I'll just go through the big old parts of it, it's kind of there, so. We did have a few, obviously right now, just before winter time, everybody wants everything done, so we have done a few new services. Mainly in Hyde Park. On the Stagecoach Road. We did finish up, believe it or not, 2 more primary underground jobs. We were able to sneak them in and get them completed. We had some danger trees, throughout the system that we had been taking care of. Bob, I know you probably seen them now. We did, get rid of 2 of the danger trees right there across from the police station. Boards was willing to cut those down, so we took the whole entire trees down. There, so we got rid of those trees, so they weren't gonna bother the village.
Now, who owns the firewood that's laying there? Anybody that comes and get board is.
No, the landowner owns that firewood,
Okay,
so,
okay.
they would have to ask him if they want them.
Okay, I don't want it, but I know somebody that might go.
Yeah, I think he owns that building.
Mhm.
I think Peter Bourne owns that building. So they would have to get a hold of him. We've been making really good use of our load loggers, putting on, different, taps that we have out there. Making sure that our fusing is correctly, done out there. We had, just recently over the weekend, we had 3 pole car accidents. Laporte Road, Morristown Corners, and then we actually had one up on Route 100 Hyde Park. That Nick had to take care of, covering on call over there. We helped the sewer boys put in a taller, I think that was a taller ring, is that the correct word down here? They had to put something there to get it come out of the ground or something, but we helped the water sewer guys. We've just been preparing the equipment, plows, everything else, getting it ready for winter time. We cleaned up all of the poles within the right of ways of 3319. They did attempt to have an outage there to replace one of the last two poles, but we were in the ledge. So unfortunately, we're gonna have to get, the ledge rig in here to set that pole. We got the Christmas lights in town, as you guys may see, running around there. Other than that, I'll just keep it a little shorter for.
One thing I'd have, Rusty, we have sold the chipper that we told you were.
Oh, you did?
You wanna tell them about that?
Yeah, we ended up, we put it on, I put it on, the marketplace for 10 grand, like we said, if we can get half of it, it'd be great. So I put it on there for 10 grand and we sold it to our natives, the town of Morrisville now owns our chipper. So they gave us $10,000 for it.
And they'll let you borrow it back.
That's half of what you paid for,
Right, 20 years ago.
20 years ago.
Yeah, 2001, we paid $20,000 for it.
So it's gone, done, just wanted to let you know.
Good job.
Yeah.
Well done.
Hydroland, Katie's is running, Morseville's running, Green River, we've got an issue with the solenoids that activate the hydraulics for the wicket gates. I think it got weirdly cold quickly a few weeks ago, and we think those might froze up and burn the solenoids out, so we gotta get those repaired. On the water side, we're hoping for a big announcement here for pretty long.
Would be coming.
And with all this stuff we're talking about, well two and riprap and well two dissipation and well four and fingers crossed. Handful of meters to replace, and I think that's some of this cold weather too. The MIUs on the outside of the buildings, and usually the batteries give up the ghost when it first gets cold, so popping those out. Sewer department, Jersey Heights pump station, probably the last big thing they'll do before winter really sets in is do a force main tie-in. So, but they're waiting for parts to do that, so depending on the weather, when the parts come in, they'll get that done. That way, when the new pumps and all the valving is in, they can just tie in. So they'll have to bypass pump in the meantime, either way, but at least that they won't have to fight it when they're ready to connect, so. And
Well, yeah, I'd add to Kevin's is just because I happen to be looking at today is, looks like even with basically 2 months of zero hydro production this year because of the drought, I mean, we literally went a long time without anything turning. We're gonna end up with the best hydro year since 2017, which was an extraordinarily high year. I don't remember that year because I wasn't working here. But everybody that has hydro had set records in 2017, and so did we, and this will be the best year since that. Even with 2 months where we virtually didn't have any turbines turning. So,
Kevin, can you manually move those solenoids?
we haven't taken them apart yet.
Oh, no, usually, I mean, the solenoids I'm used to working with, there's a pin, and you take a welding wire, and you stick it in and it moves.
Well, they should move freely enough, because it's just a magnetic coil that pulls it back, but. Either ice got buggered up in there. Or something in the oil, but we wanna drain the oil out completely.
this just happened, Bob, they've got to get into them, it just happened.
Yeah, so burn the solenoids up, and so we gotta replace those and
Mhm.
the whole, we don't go through the whole.
Have you ever changed the oil in them?
No. No,
Might help, huh?
cause that's the first question. John, is it change?
What's that?
It gets moisture, it gets condensation,
Yeah.
it gets cold, it freezes.
That's what we suspect.
The one item I would report on for Penny is just the whole team, not just her team, but everybody's been looking at this accounting, customer information system platform called NIST, and so I expect. I don't know that it'll be by our next meeting, but within the next 2 or 3 meetings, I suspect we'll be coming with some sort of recommendation for you on, where we're gonna pivot our, 25-year-old computer system storage, software system storage. So, these guys are both thumbs up, I can tell you that. A lot more intuitive. So, I think the reviews have been very good so far, is what I would tell you, but, you know, and Penny's pretty close to making a recommendation, but, you know, she set up one or two more, there's one or two modules we ran out of time to look at. So you're really doing a good job making sure everybody has looked at everything, and then the purpose is that what we don't want, because with any new technology project you do, there's always people that are like, well, who made this decision? You know, this is a piece of crap because they don't know how to use it. And so what she's been doing a really good job of is everyone's getting to see every piece of it. So like, it's not pennies, it's all of ours. Like, we're all making this decision, takes longer. And at the end of the day, you know, we're not taking a vote, but like, everyone's getting eyes on, and so far everyone's going like this. So at the back end, when people are grumbling, because every technology project has trouble in the startup, right? And you know this, you live this. There's no such thing as a good startup of a new technology. When people are grumbling, they're gonna be reminding them like, you're all in, come on, let's go.
I've got your picture.
Yeah, so anyway, just wanted to give you that update. And on my side, just some quick things. By next week, we should have 3 proposals, for our battery energy storage system, from 3 different companies, and then we've got PEPSA. We'll then look at the economics of the 3 proposals and see which one derives the most value. So by one of your January meetings, we'll probably have a recommendation on which one to go with. So that's coming. You know, we should be, it's probably a 2028 install, because the lead time on these things is enormous. But you know, I'm guessing we're gonna be looking at the $500,000 a year-ish of savings, something of that magnitude for no cost for us. So it will cost us essentially, that's net, we should save at least on that order. So very non-trivial, for us, so it'll be a good thing for us to do. So you'll learn more about that. We saw the first, VEPSA budgets today at their meeting. So their general budgets are going up about 2 to 3%, so nothing to worry about. And they're projecting about 1% load growth for us, which, you know, is good for utilities, because for 25 years we've had none. And what we're trying to figure out is exactly what's happening in power supply. The initial power supply cost of like, power supply is gonna cost a whole lot more in 2026 than it did in 2025, not just for us, for everybody. And then get stable for 2 or 3 years, so, you know, I'm trying to get more clarity about the number they gave us, because they said power supply, but our power supply bills then also have a whole lot of puts and takes, you know, credits and costs. And usually in that game, we win, and so our initial power supply cost is usually lower than just power supply. By the time we get to the bottom, between value of renewable energy credits and all these other things, right? So I don't have a precise number on that, but that number could be big enough alone to force us to have another rate increase, so, and it's totally out of our control. It's just one of those ones that you don't get to control when you pay for power.
We talked about doing the automatic 2%.
This number could be big enough that you won't do it. I hope, we've been thinking, until that number came in, we've been thinking we might be able to make that work. So that's why I'm getting more clarity. I don't have that tonight. We may have an opportunity, which would again be coming to you, to enter a purchase power agreement for a piece of the solar project over in Swanton. The reason for that would be we have all these renewable energy credits we have to have for the state to meet the state renewable energy standard. We're good on most of them until about 2030, and by 2030 we won't have enough renewable energy credits to meet the law. So we would not be a big player in this, but if we do it, and if the numbers look good, it would let us be in compliance through 2035 with that process, so. Yeah, go ahead.
You kind of floated out, maybe buying a big solar array that might be for sale.
That's another possibility. We'll probably know about that in 3 to 6 months. Yeah, so we got a couple options on that front. We've told you that we've been working on an agreement with Stowe about letting them put an understory on a piece of our sub-transmission line. I think by January, we'll be bringing an an operating agreement that we signed with them and with Johnson, since Johnson is a minority owner of our transmission. But Rusty's been working closely with them on that, and I think we'll be there soon. And the last piece, I just wanted you to know, with all the news that you read all over the place, not just the ones we're helping, but all over the place about some of the communities struggling. I think what it seems like is gonna happen is undefined yet exactly what it'll look like. But I think the state, Department of Public Services likely to require a top to bottom review of all munis, including, whether you've had trouble or not. Which from where they sit, with as many munis as have had trouble in the last 2 or 3 years. From where they sit, probably makes a lot of sense, but where we sit, gonna feel like a bother. Just something else to do, because they're gonna ask for a crap ton of data.
So they're gonna come in and audit you, or they just gotta,
Not so much an audit at the first, you're just gonna ask for all kinds of data that their staff probably don't have time to look at. And try to see try to do a quick
who's next?
view of, who might be in trouble next, and then gauge how much further they have to go. The expectation here is, at least what the commissioner is saying is, as each of us have our turn, that he wants to come and actually meet with the trustees of each utility and share what they think they learned, which is good practice. I'm glad you want to come talk to you. I give you
Well,
a
he was
chance.
here before, wasn't he? With another group?
I don't think, yeah, he came.
You were present when he was here.
Yeah, he was sitting over here.
Correct, well, he came when the governor did his, county seat for a day thing, or whatever the heck he called it, capital for a day, that's what it's called. Yeah, so that's what's going on that front, so, more to come, but, more process. And again, I get why they're doing it from where they sit, so I hate doing more process just for process sake, but I'm not sure I wouldn't be doing anything different if I was sitting where he sits, to be honest. To be fair, so, anyhow. Unless you have questions, we do need an executive session for. Oh, golly, I'm getting down the list here, let me just see what the reasons were, so, legal. Negotiations. Yeah, that'll cover it, legal and negotiations. If someone wants to send us into that.
I'll make a motion to go into executive session for, do I need to read the numbers here?
Yeah, if you have them.
Okay.
Yeah.
VSA 313, A1B, A1A, and A1F.
I'll second it.
Motion made and seconded to go into executive session at 7:17 PM. We are in executive session.
Alright.
Aye.
Look this on right there.
We'll come out of executive session at 7:48 PM. Do I have a motion?
To adjourn,
Yep.
motion to adjourn.
I'll second it.
Motion been made and seconded. Is there any further discussion? All those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
We are out at 7:48 PM. We are adjourned.
Have a safe drive home, Tom.
Thanks, guys.
Beat up on Tyler about.
Take care, Tom.
Thanks all.